It's been a month since the first Unleashed pre-rifts happened in China, so it's a perfect opportunity to look at the 62 tournaments played there and online to see what the initial days of the new meta look like, whether the new legends made a splash, and many other questions. I'm Simon from Games Deconstructed, and let's get started. And to start us off, here's the overall top 8 legend representation across all the events in our sample. 11.2% of the pie goes to LeBlanc Deceiver, followed by Irelia at 10%, Proving Grounds Mastery at 7%, Kaisa and Lilia at about 6%, and a huge list of 13 different legends between 2 and 5%. This is a very fragmented distribution, indicative of a meta where everyone's testing, and the best decks haven't yet been figured out. Zooming in at top 4s and top 2s, we don't even see the usual trend that we see in these videos, where the top 2-3 decks increase their dominance. True, LeBlanc remains the most popular top 4 legend, but when it comes to tournament finals, she's overtaken very slightly by Irelia and Diana. And for a meta that's this fragmented, it would make sense to group these legends into color pairs. Especially for certain good stuff style decks, it might not yet be clear which legend champion combo might be the best home for their pile of overall good cards in their colors. And this is definitely a conversation we will need to have about the Draven, Annie, Pike trifecta, for example. By looking at the combined stats for, say, red-purple, we might be able to see early signs of the color pair being good or bad before the community figures out that, say, Annie is the best leader for that color pair. And looking at our top 8 data through that lens, it doesn't change that much, but it is a bit easier to digest. Mind Order is 15.5% of top 8s, mainly driven by LeBlanc, though Victor is on the top 10 legends list as well. Then it's Calm Chaos, mainly Irelia with a little bit of Vex. Body Order is an interesting one, because it's 5% Fiora, 3% Set, and 1% Poppy. But if a single one of these decks became the definitive best orange-yellow shell, it could take up as much as 9% of the top 8 meta, which would make it the third most popular deck, competing for the second place spot even. And that is even though none of these decks individually is in contention for any of these top spots. Now, as I am beyond hyped to see how these new legends fare, let's see the same data sliced by the set of the legends. So, what percentage of our top 8s is Origins legends versus Spiritforged legends versus the newly released Unleashed legends? And here, Unleashed takes a 39% slice, followed by Spiritforged at 31.5% and Origins at 29.5%, which is surprisingly even. Genuinely didn't expect that to be the case. Obviously, in these early testing stages, we can assume that new set of legends is going to get a little boost in popularity, all other things being equal. There's more unknowns to test with these new strategies compared to some of those older legends, which of course also got further support, they also got new cards, but kind of less of them. And the process of testing these unknowns is both satisfying from a fun perspective, we obviously all want to play with the new cards, but it's also worthwhile from a competitive standpoint. Being the first to really figure out a new strategy gives you a competitive advantage for the next couple of tournaments before the competition has a chance to catch up. It also gives you a good bit of clout, which is always a motivator. Now, something else I am personally interested in is seeing how Unleashed release impacted battlefield choices. I believe battlefields to be very central and very impactful on Riftbound deck building, so I'm always keen to see how shaking things up on that front is going to look. And there's gonna be a bigger video on the channel very soon about Unleashed's impact on deck building, but here's a sneak peek at which battlefields see the most play in the decks that make up our sample. 44% are from Origins, 26% from Spiritforged, and 30% from Unleashed. We will have to see if Unleashed Battlefields overtaking Spiritforged is just another case of folks testing out the new hotness or if it's going to stick, but for the time being there isn't a single battlefield or a couple of battlefields that are kind of a league above the rest. as was the case with, say, the Dreaming Tree in early Spirit Forged, when it made up about 25% of all the decks in our sample. I believe that was the January meta. Overall, there is a lot of experimentation going on with what the optimal battlefields look like, and in the first couple of Nexus nights after the set drops in the West, you should very much expect the unexpected. Once we figure out what the best decks are, the best selection of battlefields for these decks are probably going to rise in popularity, so once the first of these two happens, the second will be soon to follow. And if you'd like to learn more about the impact of Unleashed on deck building going beyond battlefields, consider subscribing to the channel or following me on my newly opened Twitter at GamesDecon. DECON. You can find a link in the description also. Now, in terms of my expectations for next month, I fully believe that two trends are gonna arise. First of all, 2 to maybe 3 decks from within our sample will rise above the rest and take up more of a double-digit top 8 share. I'd put my money on LeBlanc being one of them, with the other being kind of up in the air. I have a bit more belief in Origins Master Yi compared to Irelia, but we will have to wait and see. I think it could very well be something from lower down on our top 8 representation list. Notably, we haven't seen as much Aurora representation as the doomsaying around Elder Dragon would point to, so perhaps there will be some changes on that front. And as I'm recording this, we have heard news about the Nova Riftbound Cash tournament, where 5 of the decks in the top 8 were some form of Aurora, so that's definitely a bit different than what we have in our sample here. The other trend that I expect to see is for the herd of 2 to 4% top 8 share decks to thin a little bit. That's especially going to happen between the decks that share a color pair, like Set and Fiora, for example. Both of these decks are home to a good number of the same good cards in their colors, so once we figure out which one is the better home for these cards, the meta will invariably shift to favor that one over the other. As for decks that are a bit slept on, I very much expect that Lucian and Kha'Zix might be dark horses if the stars align, and I think yellow aggro, perhaps Rek'Sai, perhaps Darius, is a bit underrepresented in the current sample. I think those are stronger than the numbers would lead us to believe right now. Let me know in the comments what you think the best and the worst deck in the Unleashed format is going to be. I've been Simon from Games Deconstructed. Thanks a lot for watching, and a special thank you to the Patreon supporters over on patreon.com/gamesdeconstructed, especially Maciej Majka, Jakub Burdun, and ASAS. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.